What happens when a cop with a mean streak, drunk on a thimble of power, decides to torment the wrong person? On a sun-scorched back road in Texas, Officer Mike Flanagan thought he was just having a little fun with a black man in a nice car. He thought a punctured tire was a harmless prank, a way to put someone in their place. He didn't know the man he targeted wasn't just any man. He was Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, call sign Reaper, a living ghost, and one of the most respected and feared commanders in the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force. This isn't a story about street justice or a simple fistfight. This is the story of how a quiet, methodical warrior used a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, to bring down an entire corrupt system, proving that the most terrifying karma isn't loud. It's silent, precise, and absolute. The heat in Garrison County, Texas, was a physical weight. It shimmered off the asphalt of County Road 218, warping the horizon into a watery mirage. From the air-conditioned cabin of his Ford Police Interceptor, Officer Mike Flanagan watched it with the bored contempt of a man who felt he deserved a bigger stage. At 32, Flanagan still had the thick neck and entitled swagger of the high school quarterback he'd once been. His authority, signified by the crisp uniform and the holstered Glock on his hip, felt less like a responsibility and more like a license. Garrison County was his kingdom, and its back roads were his personal fiefdom. He knew every pothole, every blind curve, and every family tree that mattered. More importantly, he knew who belonged and who didn't. His uncle Sheriff Jedediah Stone made sure the world stayed in its proper order. Complaints against deputies, especially his nephew, had a way of getting lost in a labyrinth of paperwork, only to evaporate like morning dew under the relentless Texas sun. Flanagan was on the tail end of a double shift, the caffeine from his morning coffee long since replaced by a simmering, aimless irritation. The day had been a bust. No drunk drivers, no domestic disputes worth leaving the car for just the monotonous procession of pickup trucks and beat-up sedans driven by people he'd known his whole life. He craved a disruption, a flicker of something interesting to break the tedium. That's when he saw it. A Dodge Charger SRT Hellcat. Its deep charcoal paint job, looking like polished thunder, was cruising smoothly toward him. It wasn't flashy with chrome or ridiculous rims. Its menace was in its subtlety. It was a predator out of place among the gazelles of rusty farm trucks. And behind the wheel, Flanagan could just make out the silhouette of a black man. A spark of something ugly and exciting lit up in Flanagan's gut. Well, now what have we here? He thought, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. The car wasn't speeding. Its lane discipline was perfect. It was, by all accounts, obeying the law. But to Flanagan, its very presence was a violation. A man like that in a car like that on his road. It was an anomaly that needed correcting. He flipped on his lights. The brilliant strobes of red and blue sliced through the afternoon haze. Inside the Charger, Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne sighed a quiet exhalation of breath. He'd been on the road for 6 hours, driving from Fort Bragg on the first leg of a rare 30-day leave. His destination was his sister's home, just 2 counties over, a place he hadn't seen in 3 years. The landscape of his country had become more foreign to him than the dusty alleyways of Kandahar or the dense jungles of the Philippines. He checked his rearview mirror. The police cruiser was closing fast, its aggressive posture unmistakable. Thorne's heart rate didn't budge. In his world, panic was a luxury that got you and everyone around you killed. He was a man conditioned by 2 decades of operating in the razor-thin margin between life and death. A traffic stop in rural Texas barely registered as a threat. It was, however, an annoyance, a problem to be managed. He pulled the Charger smoothly onto the gravel shoulder, the engine's low rumble a stark contrast to the sudden silence of the countryside. He killed the engine, rolled down all 4 windows, and placed his hands on top of the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. His movements were economical, deliberate. There was no wasted energy, no hint of agitation. Flanagan took his time getting out of the cruiser. He adjusted his belt, hitched up his pants, and let the silence stretch. It was part of the ritual, the establishment of dominance. He approached the passenger side, deliberately avoiding the driver's window, to force the man to turn and crane his neck. It was a small act of physical and psychological discomfort he enjoyed imposing. He peered inside. The man in the driver's seat was maybe 40, with a lean, powerful build that even a simple black t-shirt couldn't hide. His head was shaved, and his face was a mask of placid neutrality. But it was his eyes that gave Flanagan a momentary pause. They were deep-set and dark, and they met Flanagan's gaze with an unnerving stillness. There was no fear in them, no anger, just a calm, analytical focus, as if he were assessing a piece of equipment. "Afternoon," Flanagan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You in a hurry to get somewhere?" "No, officer." Thorne replied, his voice a low baritone, calm and even. "License, registration, and proof of insurance." Flanagan clipped his eyes, roaming over the pristine interior of the car. It was clean, almost sterile. No fast food wrappers, no clutter. It bugged him. Thorne didn't break eye contact. He moved his right hand slowly, deliberately toward the glove compartment. "I'm reaching for my vehicle's registration and insurance. They are in a black folio. My wallet containing my driver's license is in my back right pocket. May I retrieve it?" The formal, precise language irritated Flanagan. It sounded like a challenge, like the man had been coached. "Just get your papers slick," he grumbled. Thorne retrieved the folio, and then, with the same measured pace, reached for his wallet. He handed the documents out the window. Flanagan snatched them and stepped back, his eyes doing another sweep. The car had North Carolina plates. Of course it did, an out-of-towner. Flanagan walked back to his cruiser, leaving Thorne waiting. He ran the plates and the license. Marcus James Thorne. No warrants, no priors. The license listed a Fayetteville address, Military Town. He looked at the registration. The car was paid in full. This fact, for some reason, annoyed Flanagan more than anything else. He sat for a full 10 minutes, letting the sun beat down on the black Charger. Let him sweat. Let him wonder. This was his favorite part of the game. Inside the car, Marcus Thorne did not sweat. He sat perfectly still, his senses on high alert. He listened to the cicadas droning in the tall grass. He watched a hawk circling high overhead. He analyzed the officer's posture, his tone of voice, the way he held his flashlight like a club. He had encountered men like Flanagan all over the world, petty tyrants who used their small allotment of power as a weapon against those they deemed lesser. They were predictable, and predictability was a weakness. Finally, Flanagan emerged from his car, a smirk playing on his lips. He had decided on his course of action. A ticket was too much paperwork. A warning was too lenient. He wanted to leave a more personal, more irritating mark. He strolled back to the driver's side of the Charger this time. As he approached, he kept his body close to the car, using his own frame to shield his actions from any potential passing traffic. He held Thorne's documents in his left hand. In his right, concealed in his palm, was a small, wicked-looking tire punch, a tool he'd confiscated from a teenage vandal years ago, and kept for moments just like this. It was a hardened steel spike set in a small handle, easy to conceal and brutally effective. "All right, Mr. Thorne," Flanagan said, leaning down. "Gonna let you off with a warning this time. But I want you to slow it down. We have laws here for a reason." I was driving 5 miles under the speed limit, Officer Thorne stated not as an argument, but as a simple fact. Flanagan's smirk tightened. "It's a courtesy. You should learn to accept it." As he handed the documents back, he let his right hand drop down to the rear tire just behind the driver's door. With Thorne's attention focused on retrieving his license, Flanagan pressed the point of the punch deep into the tire's vulnerable sidewall. It slid in with a faint, almost inaudible hiss, a sound completely masked by the crunch of his boots on the gravel. He pulled it out just as quickly. The whole act took less than 2 seconds. It was a clean, surgical puncture, a slow, irreparable leak. He straightened up, tapping the roof of the Charger twice. "You have a good day now." Flanagan walked back to his cruiser, a giddy sense of satisfaction warming his chest. He imagined the man driving a few miles down the road, the tire slowly deflating, leaving him stranded on the hot, lonely asphalt. He imagined the frustration, the anger, the helplessness. It was perfect. A small, anonymous punishment delivered with impunity. He got back in his car, cranked the AC, and pulled away without a backward glance. He didn't see Marcus Thorne get out of his car. He didn't see him kneel down by the rear tire, his fingers finding the small, precise slit in the rubber. He didn't see the man's expression change, or rather, not change at all. The placid mask remained. But the eyes, those unnervingly calm eyes, sharpened with a new, colder intensity. Marcus Thorne looked down the road in the direction the police cruiser had gone. He didn't feel anger. Anger was a corrosive emotion, a fire that consumed the user. What he felt was something far more potent. He felt a sense of purpose. A problem had presented itself. An imbalance had been introduced into the system. And Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, call sign Reaper, was above all else a problem solver. For a civilian, a flat tire on a deserted road is a crisis. For Marcus Thorne, it was a logistical puzzle. He didn't curse. He didn't kick the offending tire. He simply opened his trunk. The interior was as organized as the car's cabin. A single rugged duffel bag was strapped down on one side. On the other, a meticulously organized emergency kit. He pulled out a compact, high-quality hydraulic jack and a lug wrench. Within 90 seconds, he had the Charger lifted his movements, fluid and efficient, honed by years of maintaining vehicles in far less forgiving environments. As he spun the lug nuts off, he examined the tire again. The puncture was exactly where he'd felt the officer press his hand. It wasn't a nail, a piece of glass, or any random road debris. It was a deliberate, clean cut, no more than a 1/4 inch wide. It was designed to be almost undetectable at first, a slow bleed that would become critical miles away from the scene of the crime. It was malicious, cowardly, but also revealing. The choice of the sidewall was key. A puncture in the tread can often be plugged. A puncture in the sidewall is a fatal wound for a tire. It cannot be safely repaired. The perpetrator knew this. This wasn't simple vandalism. It was sabotage with a specific technical understanding. He had the spare donut on in under 10 minutes. As he lowered the car, he wiped his hands on a clean rag from his kit, his mind already working several steps ahead. The immediate problem, mobility, was solved. Now came the more complex problem, the officer. Reaching for his phone, he didn't call his sister to tell her he'd be late. He didn't call a tow truck. He opened a browser and searched for Auto Repair Garrison County Teak. A few options popped up. He chose one with decent reviews, Gus's Tire and Lube, located in the town of Northwood, the county seat. He drove the 50-mile-per-hour rated spare, with exacting precision, the slight wobble a minor inconvenience. The anger that the officer had expected him to feel was absent. Thorne had learned long ago to separate emotion from analysis. Emotion was a variable that could not be controlled. The facts, however, were data points. Data point 1. The Officer Flanagan initiated a stop without probable cause. Data point 2. His demeanor was unprofessional and implicitly biased. Data point 3. He inflicted deliberate property damage with the intent to strand a civilian. Data point 4. The act was surreptitious, indicating a consciousness of guilt and a pattern of behavior. He arrived at Gus's Tire and Lube, a classic greasy spoon garage run by a grizzled man in his late 60s, with Gus embroidered on his oil-stained shirt. "Help you?" Gus asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yes," Thorne said, his voice polite. "I need a new tire. My spare is on. The old one is in the trunk. I believe the sidewall was punctured." Gus grunted and followed him to the trunk. Thorne lifted out the massive performance tire. Gus whistled. "That's a pricey piece of rubber. What did you hit?" "I'd like you to tell me," Thorne said. Gus rolled the tire into his shop and put it on a stand, inspecting the sidewall. His experienced fingers found the slit almost immediately. He squinted at it, then looked up at Thorne, his expression changing from professional curiosity to wary sympathy. "Son," he said, lowering his voice, "you didn't hit anything. This was a blade. A real small one. See how clean that is? No tearing, no abrasion from the road. Something was pushed right through here. Deliberate." "That's what I thought," Thorne said, his face unreadable. "You have a run-in with someone?" Gus asked, his eyes shrewd. "A law enforcement officer about 20 miles back on County Road 218. Thorne replied simply. Gus's face soured. He let out a long, weary sigh and looked around his own shop as if checking for eavesdroppers. "White cruiser kinda beefy fella, looks like he played some football. That sounds like him. Flanagan." Gus spat the name like it was a piece of rotten fruit. "Mike Flanagan, sheriff's nephew. Thinks he owns the damn county." He looked at Thorne, a black man in a world Gus knew all too well. "I've heard stories, never seen proof, but... damn. I'm sorry, mister. That boy's a menace." "Does he have a history of this?" Thorne asked, his tone deceptively casual, like a lawyer gathering information. Gus hesitated, polishing a wrench that was already clean. "Look, I just fix tires, but folks talk, especially the folks he tends to pull over. You're not the first person to come in here with a story that don't add up after a run-in with him. But Jedediah Stone is his uncle. Nothing sticks to that kid." "Thank you, Gus. You've been very helpful," Thorne said. "Can you get me a new tire? Gonna have to order it. High performance like this. Take a day. I can have it here tomorrow afternoon." "That's fine," Thorne said. He paid for the tire in advance, then asked another question. "Is there a coffee shop nearby with good Wi-Fi?" Gus gave him directions to a small cafe on the town square. As Thorne left, Gus watched him go, a strange feeling in his gut. The man wasn't ranting or raving. He wasn't threatening to sue or beat anyone up. He was quiet, composed. And in Gus's long experience, it was the quiet ones you had to watch out for. Thorne found the cafe, ordered a black coffee, and sat at a small table in the corner. He pulled out a small, nondescript tablet from his duffel bag. It was a hardened piece of military-grade tech, wiped of any identifying software that connected to the internet through a secure encrypted satellite link. To the cafe's network, he was just another customer using their public Wi-Fi. In reality, he was accessing a ghost network, invisible to conventional tracking. His objective was simple intelligence gathering. Phase 1. He started with public records. Officer Mike Flanagan, Garrison County Sheriff's Department. He found news articles, mostly fluff pieces from the local paper about charity events or holiday safety warnings. He found the department's official website with a smiling, fatherly picture of Sheriff Jedediah Stone. Flanagan was listed as a patrol deputy. Then he dug deeper. He accessed a secure channel he and a few of his colleagues in the special operations community maintained. His contact was a man known only as Oracle, a former NSA signals intelligence analyst who now worked as a private contractor for the kind of people who needed information no one else could get. Thorne sent a simple encrypted message. Subject: inquiry. Body individual of interest: Deputy Michael Flanagan, Garrison County, Sheriff's Dep, Texas, associated with Sheriff Jedediah Stone. Requesting full background, sealed complaints, pattern analysis. Non-kinetic. Information purposes only. The phrase non-kinetic was crucial. It meant he wasn't planning a physical operation. Information purposes only was the official line. What he did with that information, however, was his own business. The reply came in less than an hour. Oracle was good. Reply Roger, that Reaper. Stand by. The name rings a faint bell. Digging. Thorne sipped his coffee. The taste was bitter, but his focus was absolute. Flanagan thought he had won. He thought his little act of malice on the roadside was the end of the story. He couldn't possibly comprehend that it was just the beginning. He had opened a door, and now he was about to find out what was waiting on the other side. Marcus Thorne wasn't a man who sought revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional. He was a man who restored balance. He was going to take Officer Flanagan's small, rotten world, put it under a microscope, and systematically, piece by piece, dismantle it. To understand Marcus Thorne, you had to understand the world he inhabited. It wasn't a world of parades and dress uniforms. It was a world of shadows of missions that were never acknowledged and successes that were never celebrated. It was the world of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta Force. Thorne hadn't started out as a ghost. He was a kid from inner-city Baltimore who saw the army as his only way out. He excelled. His physical prowess was notable, but it was his mind that set him apart. He possessed a supernatural calmness, an ability to see complex problems not as threats, but as equations waiting to be solved. He moved through the ranks of the 75th Ranger Regiment with quiet competence, earning the respect of his peers and the attention of his superiors. He was recruited into the unit after his 3rd tour in Afghanistan. The selection process was a brutal month-long trial by fire in the mountains of West Virginia, designed to break men down to their absolute core. It wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about psychological resilience, intelligence, and the ability to operate under unimaginable stress. Of the 120 elite soldiers who started selection with Thorne, only 8 finished. Thorne was one of them. Over the next 15 years, he became a legend within a community of legends. His call sign, Reaper, wasn't given for his lethality, though he was lethally efficient. It was for the way he operated. When a situation was hopelessly compromised, when a corrupt command structure was actively working against U.S. interests, when a high-value target was surrounded by an impenetrable web of protection, they sent in the Reaper. He didn't just execute missions, he deconstructed them. He would spend weeks, sometimes months, in country, learning the culture, the power dynamics, the networks of money and influence. He moved unseen, gathering intelligence, identifying the linchpins holding the corrupt system together. He never targeted the muscle. He targeted the foundation. A quiet word here, a leaked piece of financial data there, a carefully orchestrated unfortunate accident for a key facilitator. He could make entire networks of insurgents or corrupt officials crumble from within, often without firing a single shot. He was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, and the results were always devastatingly effective. His file was a collection of blacked-out redactions. But the whispers in the intelligence community told the real story. He was the architect behind the sudden resignation of a notoriously anti-American general in North Africa. He was the unseen hand that exposed a massive money laundering scheme funding terrorists in Southeast Asia, leading to the quiet arrest of a dozen powerful businessmen. He was the man who walked into a hostage crisis in a European embassy unarmed and walked out 3 hours later with all 10 hostages, leaving their captors in a state of such psychological disarray that they surrendered to the first janitor they saw. This was the man, sitting in a Texas cafe sipping coffee. The problem of Officer Flanagan was on the scale of his life's work, microscopic. A gnat. But Thorne's operational philosophy was absolute: no threat is too small to be ignored. A small infection left untreated can lead to sepsis. A single corrupt cop left unchecked erodes faith in the entire system. And Marcus Thorne believed in the system, or at least what it was supposed to stand for. His tablet buzzed. A new message from Oracle. Reply: got a hit. It's deeper than a traffic stop. Flanagan and his uncle have been running that county like a piggy bank. I'm cross-referencing civil asset forfeiture records with traffic citations. The pattern is brazen. A file package began to download encrypted layer by encrypted layer. Thorne watched the progress bar his face impassive. Oracle. The name also flagged a DOJ preliminary inquiry file. Opened 18 months ago, then went cold. Titled Garrison County, Pattern of Practice. Looks like someone at the local U.S. Attorney's office tried to poke the bear and got their hand slapped by a friendly judge. I'm pulling the source file. It's buried deep. This might take a few hours. Thorne closed his eyes for a moment. This was the linchpin, a pre-existing federal file. He wasn't starting a new fire. He was pouring gasoline on embers that had never truly gone out. His phone vibrated. A text from his sister, Sarah. Hey bro, everything okay? Getting worried. He typed back a reply. All good. Had a minor car issue. I'll be there this evening. Don't wait up for dinner. He looked out the window at the quaint town square. The American flag flew from a pole in the center. People milled about, living their lives completely unaware of the invisible wars fought on their behalf, or the quiet corruption festering in their own backyard. Flanagan had made a critical error. He hadn't just punctured a tire on a car. He had, through his arrogance, made himself a target of interest to a man whose entire life was dedicated to the study and eradication of targets. He had no idea of the analytical power now being focused on his small, grubby life. He couldn't comprehend that his file was being dissected by one of the world's foremost intelligence analysts at the behest of one of its most effective special operators. Thorne finished his coffee. The first phase, intelligence gathering, was well underway. The next phase was analysis. He would connect the dots. He would find the weak points, the leverage, the fulcrum on which he could place his lever and move Flanagan's world. He was no longer just a soldier on leave. He was on a mission. The theater of operations wasn't a desert or a jungle. It was Garrison County, Texas. And the objective was justice. Not the loud, fiery justice of a Hollywood movie, but the cold, quiet, and permanent justice of the Reaper. For the next 3 hours, Marcus Thorne didn't move. He sat in the corner of the cafe, a statue of concentration as Oracle's data flowed into his tablet. It was a deluge of information, a digital ghost of Garrison County's dirty secrets. Oracle hadn't just pulled a file, he'd unearthed a graveyard. The picture that emerged was one of systemic generational corruption, perfected by Sheriff Jedediah Stone, and executed with relish by his nephew Mike Flanagan. It was a finely tuned machine designed to enrich the department and its leadership while oppressing anyone who couldn't fight back. The primary mechanism was civil asset forfeiture. Oracle had cross-referenced traffic stop data with forfeiture records. The pattern was undeniable. Flanagan had an uncanny knack for pulling over out-of-county vehicles, often driven by minorities, or vehicles that suggested the owner had money, like a nice RV or a car towing a boat. He would then manufacture probable cause for a search. A drug dog that alerted a dog handled by a deputy who was also in on the scheme, a claim he smelled marijuana, or a vague, furtive movement. During the search, he would invariably find cash, vacation money, cash for a large purchase emergency funds. Anything over $1,000 was subject to seizure under the suspicion of being tied to narcotics trafficking. The owners, often travelers just passing through, were faced with a daunting choice: hire a Texas lawyer and fight a lengthy, expensive court battle to prove their money was legitimate, or give up and continue on their way. Most gave up. The seized money rarely made it into the official county coffers. Oracle had found a series of transactions from the sheriff's discretionary fund to a handful of shell corporations. One bought specialized tactical equipment that was never delivered from a company whose registered agent was Jedediah Stone's brother-in-law. Another paid exorbitant consulting fees to a security firm owned by a former deputy who had retired under a cloud of suspicion. It was a self-sustaining cycle of theft laundered through bureaucracy. But it was the buried complaints that painted the darkest picture. Oracle had managed to resurrect the ghosts of a dozen official complaints filed against Flanagan that had been deemed unfounded by Sheriff Stone. There was the case of the Martinez family migrant farm workers whose truck was pulled over by Flanagan for a broken tail light. Their entire season's earnings, over $8,000 in cash saved to send back to their family in Mexico, was seized. They were threatened with deportation if they made a fuss. There was the story of a young black college student driving home for Christmas break. Flanagan pulled him over, claimed his car smelled of weed. The kid was a star athlete who had never touched the stuff and tore the car apart in the search, breaking personal items. No drugs were found, but Flanagan issued him a slew of citations for things like improperly displayed air freshener and worn wiper blades, totaling over $1,200 in fines. And then there was the most disturbing file, the one from the DOJ's preliminary inquiry. It had been spearheaded by a young, ambitious assistant U.S. attorney named David Chen. Chen had received an anonymous tip from within the sheriff's department and had started digging. He found the patterns, the suspicious forfeitures, the hushed-up complaints. He was building a case. But Sheriff Stone was a powerful man with deep political connections. He had the local congressman and a state senator in his pocket. A friendly federal judge, appointed with the senator's backing, had quashed Chen's subpoenas, citing a lack of evidence. The inquiry stalled. David Chen was quietly reassigned to a dead-end post in North Dakota. 6 months later, his career momentum shattered. The system had protected itself. Thorne read through Chen's meticulous notes. The young AUSA had been on the right track. He had the what, but he lacked the how. He couldn't get inside the machine. He couldn't produce a witness or an insider who could blow the whistle. Marcus Thorne sat back, the tablet's glow reflecting in his still eyes. He now had the full picture. The anatomy of the beast was laid bare before him. Flanagan wasn't just a racist cop with a mean streak. He was the tip of the spear of a criminal enterprise masquerading as a law enforcement agency. The puncture of his tire wasn't a random act. It was a symptom of a deep-seated disease. This changed the parameters of the mission. His initial goal was to address the actions of a single officer. Now the objective was the entire network. Flanagan was no longer the target. He was the entry point. The key. Thorne began to formulate a plan. A direct assault was out of the question. Going to the press would be messy and could compromise the evidence. Filing another complaint would just see it buried like all the others. He needed a different approach. He needed to create a situation that the system couldn't ignore, a problem so undeniable that the powers that be would be forced to act. He needed to get the attention of the man who had tried and failed once before. He needed to give David Chen a reason to come back and finish what he started. But this time he would come back with an arsenal of evidence so perfect, so irrefutable, that no friendly judge or corrupt politician could stand in his way. Thorne looked at Officer Flanagan's duty roster, which Oracle had helpfully procured. Flanagan was scheduled to work security at the annual Garrison County Founders' Day barbecue that Saturday. It was the biggest social event of the year, a celebration of the town's history, and a de facto campaign rally for Sheriff Stone, who would be there shaking hands and kissing babies. It was the perfect stage. A public venue filled with witnesses, an opportunity to confront the jester in the court of his king. Thorne closed the tablet. He had the intelligence. He had the objective. And now he had the location. He paid for his coffee, leaving a $20 bill on the table. As he walked out into the fading afternoon light, his mind was already choreographing the final act. He wasn't going to the barbecue for a fight. He was going to set a trap. And Mike Flanagan was about to walk right into it. The Garrison County Founders' Day barbecue was a Rockwell painting come to life if Rockwell had a fondness for cheap beer and political glad-handing. Held in the main town park, it was a sea of plaid shirts, cowboy hats, and patriotic bunting. The air was thick with the smell of smoked brisket and the sound of a C-list country band butchering a Johnny Cash classic. Sheriff Jedediah Stone was in his element, a silver-haired shark gliding through a school of minnows. He moved with an easy practiced charm, his hand outstretched, his smile broad. His nephew, Mike Flanagan, stood near the entrance gate, his arms crossed, wearing a polo shirt with the department's logo. He was supposed to be providing security, but mostly he was scanning the crowd, basking in the reflected glory of his uncle's power. Into this scene walked Marcus Thorne. He was dressed in khaki pants and a plain, dark blue button-down shirt. He looked like any other anonymous attendee. No one gave him a second glance. He bought a bottle of water and found a spot under a large oak tree, far enough from the stage to be out of the main throng, but with a clear line of sight to both Flanagan and the sheriff. For an hour, he simply observed. He watched the way Flanagan interacted with people he knew. His posture relaxed and jovial. He watched how he sized up outsiders, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He watched the sheriff work the crowd, noting who he spent the most time with the mayor. A few wealthy ranchers, the owner of the largest construction company in the county. Thorne wasn't just watching people. He was mapping a power structure. Finally, the moment was right. The sheriff was occupied in a deep conversation across the park. The crowd around the entrance had thinned. Flanagan was leaning against a fence, looking bored. It was time. Thorne walked calmly directly toward him. He stopped a few feet away, his expression neutral. "Officer Flanagan," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the background noise with surgical precision. Flanagan looked up, a flicker of irritation in his eyes at being addressed so formally. He didn't recognize Thorne at first. He just saw a black man he didn't know. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone already dismissive. "I'm not sure," Thorne replied, taking a slow sip of his water. "I was just thinking about vehicle maintenance. It's important, you know, especially tire pressure. A slow leak can be a real problem. It can leave you stranded in the middle of nowhere." Recognition dawned in Flanagan's eyes, followed instantly by a wave of arrogant amusement. The guy from the Charger. He couldn't believe the nerve. This guy had hunted him down to complain about a flat tire. The audacity was almost impressive. "Is that right?" Flanagan said, a condescending smirk spreading across his face. He straightened up, puffing his chest out slightly. "Well, you should take better care of your stuff. Can't blame the county roads for your bad luck." "It wasn't bad luck," Thorne said, his gaze unwavering. "The puncture was in the sidewall, a clean cut about a quarter-inch wide. The mechanic at Gus's said it was deliberate. He said he's heard stories about things like that happening after certain traffic stops." Flanagan's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. The mention of Gus's shop was a direct hit he hadn't expected. He quickly recovered his amusement, hardening into aggression. "That sounds like a personal problem, not a police matter," he said, taking a half-step closer, trying to use his size to intimidate. "Now I think you've said your piece. Why don't you move along and enjoy the party?" Thorne didn't move. He didn't even blink. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice dropping even lower, forcing Flanagan to lean in to hear. "I'm not here to complain. I'm here to offer some professional advice." "Advice?" Flanagan scoffed. "I don't need any advice from you." "I think you do," Thorne said. He took another sip of water, his eyes locked on Flanagan's. "See, your problem isn't that you're a bully, it's that you're sloppy. You leave patterns. For example, your preference for targeting out-of-county plates on routes 218 and 87, particularly between the hours of 2 and 5 p.m. Your forfeiture seizures show a 300% increase on days when the county banks are closed, suggesting you target people you know will be carrying weekend cash." Flanagan's face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly mottled white. This was impossible. How could this man know these details? Thorne continued, his voice a relentless, quiet monotone. "Then there's the Martinez family. August 12th last year. A broken tail light. 8 pulls, 450 seized. The complaint was buried by your uncle, citing lack of credible evidence. Or David Chen, the assistant U.S. attorney. His preliminary inquiry was quashed by Judge Abernathy, a man your uncle plays golf with every second Thursday. Chen was reassigned to Fargo 3 weeks later. Every word was a hammer blow. Flanagan felt the air leave his lungs. He was looking at Thorne, but he wasn't seeing the man from the traffic stop anymore. He was seeing something else, something terrifyingly calm and all-knowing. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry croak came out. Who are you?" he finally managed to whisper. Thorne allowed a very small, very cold smile to touch his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. I'm just a guy with a flat tire. A guy who believes in accountability. You made a mistake, officer. You assumed I was powerless. You assumed I was just another victim you could hurt without consequence. He leaned in a little closer, his voice barely a breath. I've passed my analysis on to some people who are very interested in Garrison County. People who can't be intimidated by your uncle or his pet judge. They will be reopening Mr. Chen's inquiry. But this time, they'll have a complete road map. They'll have names, dates, account numbers. They will have everything. Flanagan was trembling now, a fine tremor running through his entire body. He looked wildly around as if searching for an escape route, but he felt pinned by Thorne's gaze. This is your one and only chance, Thorne said, his voice hardening slightly. You can cooperate and tell them everything you know about your uncle's forfeiture scheme. Or you can take the fall for all of it. They will offer you a deal. I suggest you take it. Because when they come for you, they will not stop. They will dismantle your life piece by piece, just like you tried to do to me and to so many others. Thorne straightened up and placed his half-empty water bottle on a nearby trash can. Accountability is coming. Officer Flanagan, he said, his voice returning to its normal calm volume. Enjoy the rest of your party. He turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd as if he were never there. Flanagan stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cheerful music of the band, the laughter of the crowd, the smell of barbecue, it all seemed distant and surreal. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a terror far more profound than any physical threat. The man hadn't shouted or threatened him. He had simply laid out the facts of his own destruction as calmly as if he were reading a weather report. Flanagan looked across the park at his uncle, who was now laughing and slapping a rancher on the back. The powerful shield he had lived behind his entire life suddenly seemed as fragile as glass. The serpent had been charmed, and the reaper had just put him on notice. The storm broke on a Tuesday. It arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of black government sedans pulling into the parking lot of the Garrison County Courthouse. 4 men and 2 women in dark conservative suits got out. They moved with a purpose that was alien to the town's lazy rhythm. They were from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and they were accompanied by a team of FBI agents from the San Antonio field office. They didn't go to the sheriff's department first. They went to the county clerk's office, armed with a federal warrant, signed by a senior judge from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, far beyond the reach of Sheriff Stone's influence. They began seizing financial records, forfeiture logs, and case files. By the time Sheriff Stone got the call, it was too late. The castle walls had been breached. He blustered and raged, threatening to call the governor. But the lead DOJ attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Flores, simply handed him a copy of the warrant and suggested he hire a very good lawyer. The news hit the town like a thunderclap. An FBI raid in Garrison County. It was unthinkable. For Mike Flanagan, the past 2 weeks had been a private hell. He hadn't slept. Every time a car pulled up behind him, he expected it to be them. He'd tried to talk to his uncle to warn him, but Stone had dismissed it as the ramblings of some nutcase. You let some guy spook you, Mikey, grow a spine, he had said. Now, as the reality of the federal investigation crashed down, Stone wasn't so dismissive. He called Flanagan into his office, his face ashen, his folksy charm gone, replaced by the raw fear of a cornered animal. Who was he, Mike? He demanded, his voice a panicked hiss. Who was that man you told me about? "I don't know," Flanagan stammered. He knew everything, Jed. Everything." The federal team was brutally efficient. They worked from the roadmap Thorne had provided. They knew exactly which files to pull, which bank accounts to freeze, which witnesses to interview. They found the Martinez family, who, protected by federal agents, finally felt safe enough to tell their story. They tracked down other victims whose stories corroborated a clear and undeniable pattern of abuse. They also paid a visit to a federal prosecutor's office in Bismarck, North Dakota. The prosecutor, David Chen, was shocked to find 2 senior FBI agents and a DOJ attorney waiting for him. They laid out the new evidence, the irrefutable data, the clear path to a conviction. They offered him the chance to lead the prosecution. It was vindication. It was justice. He accepted without hesitation. The linchpin was the money trail. With Thorne's intelligence, the FBI's forensic accountants unraveled Stone's network of shell corporations in less than 48 hours. They found the kickbacks, the laundered cool, the whole rotten enterprise. The agents finally came for Flanagan at his home. They didn't kick down the door. They just knocked. When he opened it, he saw 2 agents, their faces grim and professional. Behind them he saw David Chen, his expression not of triumph, but of somber duty. "Michael Flanagan," one agent said, "you are under arrest for deprivation of rights, under color of law, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering." As they cuffed him, Flanagan felt a sense of surreal detachment. It was all happening exactly as the man in the park had said it would. It was a methodical, systematic dismantling. He was offered the deal Thorne had predicted: cooperate fully against his uncle and the other deputies involved, and they would recommend a lighter sentence. Staring at a potential 20-year prison sentence, his bravado crumbled completely. He took the deal. He sang like a canary, detailing every sordid aspect of the scheme his uncle had orchestrated. Sheriff Jedediah Stone was arrested the next day, not by his own deputies, but by the FBI. They took him from his office in handcuffs, the fatherly protector of Garrison County, exposed as a common thief. His political allies vanished overnight, their phone calls suddenly going unanswered. The system that had protected him for so long had now turned on him, eager to cut out the cancerous limb. The media descended on the town. The story went national. Corrupt Texas Sheriff's Department, taken down by federal probe. The articles detailed the years of abuse, the racist targeting, the systematic theft. But in all the coverage, there was no mention of a Delta Force commander or a man with a punctured tire. To the world, the investigation was the result of the DOJ's own diligent work. There were no heroes in the story, only villains getting their due. Marcus Thorne was long gone. He had spent a wonderful, quiet 3 weeks with his sister and her family. He played with his nieces, helped fix a leaky faucet, and enjoyed the simple peace of a normal life. On the day of Flanagan's arrest, he was driving his Charger, now fitted with 4 brand-new high-performance tires, back towards Fort Bragg. He heard the news on a radio report. He listened intently, a faint, almost imperceptible nod, his only reaction. The karma that hit Mike Flanagan wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow, grinding, and absolute destruction of his world. He lost his job, his reputation, his freedom, and the respect of everyone he had ever known. His name became a local synonym for disgrace. All because of a moment of petty cruelty on a hot Texas afternoon. He had picked the wrong car, the wrong man, and had become a footnote in the quiet war of a man he would never truly understand. 9 months later, the legal battles were over. The Garrison County Sheriff's Department was placed under a federal consent decree, forcing a complete overhaul of its policies and personnel. Jedediah Stone, refusing any plea deal out of sheer arrogance, was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Mike Flanagan, for his cooperation, received a sentence of 3 years. He would serve his time in a low-security facility, a broken man, stripped of the uniform that had given him his only sense of identity. In a Spartan apartment near Fort Bragg, Marcus Thorne sat at his kitchen table, reading an article on his tablet. It was a follow-up piece from a national news outlet, detailing the positive changes in Garrison County under the new federally supervised leadership. Community trust in the police was slowly being rebuilt. The forfeiture abuses had stopped. David Chen, now a rising star in the DOJ, was quoted extensively. Thorne took a sip of his morning coffee. There was no triumph in his posture, no gloating. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. A system had been corrupted. He had rebalanced it. For him, it was no different than clearing a hostile compound or rescuing a hostage. It was a problem that required a precise and permanent solution. His work was invisible. His name would never be connected to the events in Texas. He was a ghost, an echo. That was the way it had to be. His brand of justice wasn't for public consumption. It was a necessary, unseen force that corrected the balance when all other systems failed. He closed the tablet. His leave was over. A new mission awaited him in another corner of the world, where chaos reigned and tyrants needed to be reminded that even in the deepest shadows, the Reaper could be watching. He finished his coffee, washed the cup, and went to pack his duffel bag. The world had countless problems. He was ready to go solve another one. That's the story of how a small act of malice brought down an empire of corruption. It reminds us that you never truly know who you're dealing with. Behind any face could be a depth of experience and a will of iron you can't possibly imagine. Officer Flanagan learned that lesson the hard way. He thought he was punching down, but he was actually poking a sleeping giant, a man who doesn't make threats. He delivers consequences. This story isn't just about karma. It's about the quiet, methodical application of pressure that can make even the most corrupt systems crumble. What did you think of Flanagan's downfall? Was it deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of silent, calculated justice, make sure to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good karma story. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more tales of when the powerful push just a little too far. Thanks for listening.